Okay, guys, so we're looking at scene 10, which is the dramatic climax of the play itself, the fatalistic moment, I think, that's suggested all the way throughout the text that will occur in some way between Stanley and Blanche, and that we've been prepared for effectively by the hostile actions carried out by Mitch in the previous scene, and I think the way that we recalibrate and reconfigure his character, and then Blanche's increasing isolation, that loss of that redemptive connection with Mitch, is completely sealed by his violation of her in the previous scene. So, first of all, Blanche has been drinking fairly steadily, which shows obviously this sense, the drunkenness sort of motif that's continually repeated throughout the play shows us her further evasion and of reality in the way that she uses alcohol as a sort of emotional anesthetic. She's dragged her wardrobe trunk into the center of the bedroom, and I think that signals to us that her performative self kind of theatricalization that she carries on through the play is both evident and being clung onto kind of determinedly here. It hangs open with flowery dresses thrown across it. However, that sort of conditioning of the handling of the trunk also suggests that she's lost control of the process. So we here see this, what she laments in the previous scene, that idea that she says in scene 9, that I don't want the truth, I don't want realism, I want what ought to be the truth. Well, here, her trunk and the kind of the costumes, I put that in kind of in speech marks, that she uses to theatricalize herself, I think are symbolically being, the control of that process is being physically represented as being lost at this moment through Williams's use of stagecraft and his props. As the drinking and packing went on, a mood of hysterical exhilaration came into her. She's decked herself out in a somewhat soiled and crumpled white satin evening gown and a pair of scuffed silver slippers. So this sort of hysterical excitement, I think, comes from not necessarily the positive conclusion, but the sense of having to attempt to formulate some other path, some other series of habits than the evasions and the escapism that she's been so rigidly determined to cling on to throughout the play so far. See her costumes here, I think, the soiled and crumpled white satin evening gown, I think, mirrors the state of her kind of performative innocence to a certain extent, but at the same time it's crumpled and soiled, so it obviously connotes that sense of taint, her performative vision of virtue and chastity has been completely destroyed. And the scuffed silver slippers with brilliance set in their heels, this particular costume, shows us a sort of an ineffectual quality, but a sense of single-minded determination to kind of cling on to this theatricalizing, aestheticized vision of herself. And that the silver slippers, obviously, that are being scuffed, show us the transformation in that her ability to convincingly play that role. She's placing the rhinestone tiara on her head before the mirror of the dressing table and murmuring excitedly as if to a group of spectral admirers. So here, she's effectively crowning herself as some kind of princess. So we're really kind of, her performative evasion of reality has got more and more extreme as her mental degeneration has progressed through the play. And here, the fact that her performance is as if to a group of admirers that's purely fabricated in a mirror and is the product of her own self-deception, I think reveals to us the way in which her imagined performance is entirely derived from her own mind. She can only carry herself as the kind of audience. You can count on herself to trust this elusive vision of herself. And the spectral admirers, of course, are kind of ghostly and illusory. And she says, how about taking a moonlight swim at the old rock quarry? For anyone sober enough to drive a car, best way to stop your head buzzing. So this particular imaginary address, I think, shows us this kind of imagined kind of conversation with soldiers, I think, in the evasion of reality. She's managed to, what's being revealed here is that kind of promiscuous behavior that she engages in with the soldiers is an evasive escape from reality. It's something that she uses to evade reality. And here we see her performing that particular role. Tremblingly, she lifts the hand mirror for a closer inspection. She catches her breath and slams the mirror face down with such violence that the glass cracks. Importantly here, self-confrontation becomes a great problem for her. She sees her own face that is in the mirror that is at odds with this performative version of her identity and can no longer tolerate this. So there's this huge sense of tension between her self-examination and the reality that it presents within her illusions. Stanley then appears around the corner and he still has on his vivid green silk bowling shirt. So he again has this colourful shirt that symbolises his impulsive sexual vitality and the domineering power that he is about to enact over the top of her. The honky-tonk music again, is suggestive, I think, of kind of ribald sexual passion. And it continues softly throughout the scene, as if it's kind of performing a sound track commentary on their kind of ironic inversion of romance. He enters the kitchen and slams the door again. He's extremely aggressive as he peers in at Blanche, and he gives a low whistle. So there's this sort of animalistic attraction that's being suggested to her here. And he's brought some quart beer bottles home with him. So again, he has been drinking also. He has been engaged in this habit that shows us that, I think it gives us a clear sort of equivalence between the two of them, that their visions of reality, neither of them are fully reconciled, and that both of them have their own limitations. In the lines that follow, she attempts to confront Stanley, but the only way that she can confront him is with illusion. So if we look in this dialogue, he says, the baby won't come home before morning, so they told me to go home and get a little shut-eye. He talks about the baby that they're about to have. Does that mean we're to be alone here? Just me and you, Blanche, unless you got somebody hid under the bed? Oh, that's right, you left before my wire came. I received a telegram from an old admirer of mine. So here, her fabrications of a story from Shep Huntley give us again the sense that the only way that she can confront him is through this fabrication that, of course, he at this point knows is a fabrication. We in the audience are deeply aware of it because we've just seen her kind of tragic performance in the moment before Stanley arrives. And so there's this awful sense of going through the motions of a story that allows her to retain a sense of power and dignity, purely, really, for the purpose of attempting initially to confront him. So there's this kind of futility in her effort to confront him. So she talks about Mr. Shep Huntley and the story behind them. And Stanley says, and come up with that gorgeous diamond tiara, this old relic. It's only rhinestones. Gosh, I thought it was Tiffany diamonds. And then he unbuttons his shirt. So there's this awful kind of mismatch, I think, here between what he's saying and the sinister sexual intent of his physical stage direction. So he's kind of playing along facetiously with his language, but his physical movements and his behavior identifies the sort of sexual predation, which I think contrasts with his jocularity and his kind of feigned good humour. So again, we have that comparison with a birthday party where language is really untrustworthy. And actually, it's only what people do and their actions that we can trust, which is such an integral part of this drama. It goes to show you never know what is coming. And again, he's humouring here, but there's an enormous sense of sinister threat that I think that warning contains about the intentions of his actions in the following scene. But just when I thought my luck began to fall me into the picture pops this Miami millionaire. So again, he's actually participates in her dialogue, which you see through the dash here, and sort of willfully participates in the creation of this illusion because he's so confident now about physically destroying her identity and its propensity for illusions. Yes, this man is from Dallas where gold spouts out of the ground. Well, just so he's from somewhere. And this sense here is this huge identification, I think, of sarcasm that attacks the kind of plausibility of her story, that shows us again him joining in, but with a more sinister intent as he removes his shirt. He's gradually stripping as the scene carries on. Close the curtains before you undress any further. And he amiably says, "This is all I'm going to undress right now," and then rips the sack off a quart beer bottle, seeing a bottle opener. So there's this kind of feigned friendliness again, and his amiability hides that sense of sinister sexual passion that he is about to enforce on her. But then again, his actions with the beer bottle, this violent ripping of the sack off of the beer bottle, I think prefigures his rape. So again, language and actions are at odds with one another in the scene. She moves then slowly towards the dresser where she stands with her hands knotted together. So there's this huge sense, I think, in her character, this vulnerability and fear in her demeanour and her actions. And then he talks here about the bottle opener again. It's this kind of masculine display of power and prowess, and opens the bottle, and the bottle cap pops off and a geyser of foam shoots up. Stanley laughs happily, holding the bottle over his head. So there's this sense of huge unleashing of tension and of physical dominance, and I think you can't really miss the kind of phallic connotations of this particular stage action that is going to, prefigures the rape scene and ejaculation, I think. And this sense of physical domination in his kind of careless drowning of himself in the beer shows us this sense of confidence and sexual aggression that he's about to unleash on her. He calls it rain from heaven, and then he offers this to her. Shall we bury the hatchet and make it a loving cup? So he thinks, he's being, he performs an act of geniality and friendliness, but obviously this, I think, then itself contains a fairly sinister threat of sexual violence and of violation. And then again, he said it's a red letter night for both of us. You having an oil millionaire and me having a baby. But that red letter night, I think, again, in terms of its colour symbolism, highlights the impending sexual passion that he is about to inflict upon her. I say that, she doesn't necessarily have any interest in this at all herself. He goes to the bureau in the bedroom and crouches to remove something from the bottom drawer. So again, his donning of the pajamas is kind of premeditated. She asks him, "What are you doing in there?" "Here's something I always break out on special occasions. The silk pajamas that I wore on my wedding night." There's this awful kind of sinister moment of, I think, domination and capture of her that involves him wearing the clothing, wearing the costume that he associates with the kind of sexual passion of his own marriage. So there's this really sinister quality about donning this costume at a moment where he is plotting the rape of his wife's sister. When the telephone rings and they say, "You've got a son, I'll tear this off and wave it like a flag." So it's supposed to be some kind of matrimonial or family connection, but it ends up being a symbol of his raw, hostile, aggressive physical sexuality. He shakes out a brilliant pajama coat. "I guess we are both entitled to put on the dog." So there's this sort of equivalence going on here. There's this sort of celebratory clothing that he's donning, and that I think in some way equivalent. It makes him equivalent to the costume that Blanche adopts at the beginning of the scene. She immediately is dressed in this extremely elaborate kind of performative costume that shows us her mental state, and I think shows us his subjective content here as well. Her sense of vulnerability and threat is evident here, though. When I think of how divine it's going to be to have such a thing as privacy once more, I could weep with joy. So there's this sense of her vulnerability that actually then leads to her sense of his irritation and his further violation of her. He says, "This millionaire from Dallas is not going to interfere with your privacy any." So then his this is his later word for that he uses to actually commit to the idea of raping her. You know, you wouldn't be so bad to interfere with. So he talks here about, you know, there's a sort of menacing sexual quality that I think exposes his own conscious awareness of the sexual subtext between the two of them at this moment in time, because he talks about, you know, having privacy, and then him sort of equating that with being fended off in sexual terms. And he says it won't be the sort of thing that you have in mind. And of course, the irony here, the grim irony of this is this is exactly what he is thinking of at this moment in time. He has full awareness and intent, I think, to carry out this rape. This man is a gentleman. He respects me, and this improvising feverishly shows us the feeble, futile nature of her continued performance of connection to this individual who she identifies as embodying chivalry. Having great wealth sometimes makes people lonely. I wouldn't know about that. So again, you know, she talks about this loneliness and ends up invoking the concepts that provoke Stanley and make him feel angry towards her. The class conflict. Now, the language that she uses is interesting in the last that follow, because she says, in a kind of self-aggrandizing way, that I think is like Stanley's inertia. These are the following lines. Stanley Weber, we mean by Stanley's inertia. A cultivated woman, a woman of intelligent and breeding, can enrich a man's life immeasurably. I have those things to offer, and this doesn't take them away. Physical beauty is passing. At the end of the line, she says, I think of myself as a very, very rich woman, but I've been foolish casting my pearls before swine. So again, her inflated performance of herself and her identity, I think, is what makes this problematic, this particular scene, because it again gives Stanley the kind of the justifiable sense of chagrin and discomfort with her that I think further provokes his sinister intent. You know, not necessarily, it absolutely doesn't excuse it, but I think it encourages it to be more, you know, for him to carry it out with a greater sense of conviction. And that's why he says, swine her. Yes, swine. And I'm thinking not only of you, but of your friend, Mr. Mitchell. So she animalizes both of them. And she's taking part in a kind of animalistic ritual without even realizing here, you know, that there's a sort of grim irony to that as well. There's a sort of unconscious participating in an unwilled mating dance that's going on right before her eyes that she can't acknowledge yet. And she says at the end, I gave him his walking papers, which again is a lie, and Stanley is aware of this, and it leads her into this kind of mistaken impression of her own power. And these are these moments, I think, that offer such great connections with Stanley. You know, that there's this moment of complacency right at the very most dangerous time in the plot for that to happen. But then he came back, he returned with a box of roses to beg my forgiveness. He implored my forgiveness, but some things are not forgivable. That repetition, obviously, sense of redemption, I think, shows her own fixation with that idea of redemption. And I think it sort of reveals to us that the reality, when she talks about that kind of magic that she's after, how it ought to be, this is an example of what she means. You know, this is the reality that it should be. And deliberate cruelty is not forgivable. And I think here it's true of the play, and I think it's what ultimately she and Stella share in common, and that's why Stella is so unhappy about what Stanley does in the previous scenes. It is the one unforgivable thing, in my opinion. It is the one thing of which I've never been guilty. So there's this sort of plea for redemption involved in this, and I think a sort of a way of adapting her discussion of someone else to reflect her own kind of beliefs and her own concerns. And so she says, you know, that this is the only thing that she's never been guilty of being cruel to each other. Thank you, but it was foolish of me to think that we could ever adapt ourselves to each other. So this is, you know, this is her sort of hamartia. This is her fatal flaw, that she cannot adapt to a changing tide of reality and to shifting power relations. We are too different. Our attitudes and our backgrounds are incompatible. We have to be realistic about such things. So there's this sense of I think this provoking Stanley's desire with a need for domination. This is about now, his rape becomes a kind of ideological one. And again, I don't mean that in a sense to sort of excuse the concrete, tangible, physical act of rape, but we see this in terms of a conflict of values, and we see this rape now as Stanley almost acting on behalf of all the people like him and Mitch that seem to represent the new America, the materialistic work, the workers who will take part in this kind of materialistic vision of the industrial 20th century. And then Stanley says, was this before or after the telegram came from the Texas oil millionaire? What telegram? No, after. As a matter of fact, the wire just came. As a matter of fact, there wasn't no wire at all. And this is the moment where the pretense breaks. And she sees this, and you see this in her language of the weakness in her delusions and illusions is apparent. And then Stanley directly confronts her here, and she has no response to this. And again, this inarticulacy in her response, I think, is comparable to the way that Stanley Weber breaks down on the birthday party. It isn't a goddamn thing but imagination and lies and conceit and tricks. And so again, although there is a huge element of truth in what he's saying, it does also reveal the crudity of his vision of reality, that he sees everything as based on these sort of limitations. And look at yourself. Take a look at yourself in that one Mardi Gras outfit rented for 50 cents from some rag picker with the crazy crown on. What queen do you think you are? And so here he exposes his repugnance and reveals his rape as a kind of an act of pure domination. There's no real reason to take this sort of level of hostility. There's no level to take this hostility towards him at this moment in time, and this is a direct attack on her greatest point of vulnerability.